Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Shira Weiss from the Sacks-Herenstein Center, and we are thrilled to welcome you to the first of a three-part online series in preparation for Shavuot that we've entitled Counting Up to Sinai. Tonight, we're going to hear from Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Schiffman on Torah study and character formation. Next Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock, we'll hear from Dr. Erica Brown on the Book of Ruth in Art and Text. And in 2 weeks, May 28th at 8 p.m., we'll hear from Rabbi Dr. David Bashevkin, and his presentation is entitled, Why Wasn't the Torah Given in Israel? The Exploration of Messianism, Zionism, and Secular Judaism. So we hope to see you at all three of these parts of the online series. Tonight, we welcome Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Schiffman. He is a professor at the Israeli Graduate School of Jewish Education and Administration, and he also is the Director of Leadership Scholars, our undergraduate cohort at the Sacks-Herenstein Center. Rabbi Dr. Schiffman, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weiss, and thank you all for coming. Looking forward to learning with you this evening. I want to explore what is a fascinating and fundamental question from one angle in particular, and that is the role of Torah study in the formation of character. We have the, I think, correct assumption that Torah can and should form our character development. We have the tradition where we read on getting ready for Shavuot in order to prepare for Matan Torah. We have a tradition to read Pirkei Avot because we assume that we need to build our character, Derech Eretz Kadmala Torah, in order to receive the Torah. And then the Torah itself, the learning of Torah, is what helps us prepare for that building of character as well. So this is a dynamic relationship between Torah building towards character and Torah study itself as forming our character. And I want to explore exactly how this happens and the best practices based on the psychological and educational theory of character education mapped onto our study of Pirkei Avot to try to as we go through this tradition of reading Pirkei Avot, to learn it in a way that best helps us form the character rather than just reading without getting that impact that the Torah study is supposed to have in the formation of character. Leading off, as we are the Sacks-Herenstein Center, with a quote from Rabbi Sacks, a powerful one, the Torah is concerned not only with behavior, but also with character, not just with what we do, but also the kind of person we become. So the Torah wants us to develop into a person of character, and the Torah itself will help us along that route. So as I mentioned, we learn Pirkei Avot, the tractate of Mishnah that's dedicated towards character, ethics, values. We have this tradition to read it on Shabbat afternoon, and that tradition actually goes back, as we'll see, to pre-medieval times, early medieval times, and it wasn't just in the weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, where we read Pirkei Avot. They actually read Pirkei Avot the entire year round, around Mincha time on Shabbat afternoon, and we're going to explore that tradition shortly. But I want to frame the problem is as follows. Even though we have this tradition where we read Pirkei Avot is supposed to build our character. In practice, just reading a text doesn't automatically and inherently bring us towards character development. And in philosophy and in education and psychology, sometimes this is referred to as the gap between moral knowledge and moral character, sometimes referred to as the character gap, the moral gap, which basically goes and says against some early philosophers, against some early psychologists who argued that moral knowledge actually leads towards moral behavior. There's a direct relationship, a correlation, or even a causation, more likely, between moral knowledge and moral character. The research tends to show that that's not true. And just because somebody knows something, reads something, learns something, and we presumably know this from our own lives, doesn't necessarily mean that because I have that knowledge that this is the right thing to do, this is the right way to behave, this is the right decision to make, that I will automatically do that. And there are many factors that create this gap, our complicated psychologies and habits, and that we've had since we were young, and maybe even part of human nature is that there's this gap between who we want to be be and who we are. So one of the things that we're going to want to do is that if we do have this tradition of learning Pirkei Avot, and Pirkei Avot is supposed to build us towards better character, is there a way of engaging in Pirkei Avot, of learning, of thinking about Pirkei Avot in a way that helps build character, that it's not just, okay, it's Shabbos afternoon, it's 7 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm still full from my big meal, and okay, the tradition is I have to read Pirkei Avot, so I'm reading the whole chapter and I skim through it, and there we go. Now I'm ready to improve my character. Now I'm a better person because I, davened up the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot, that I just read through it quickly and didn't really pay attention to it. Obviously, that's not going to have the impact. So we're going to try to explore what is the proper method of engaging, of reading, of thinking about Pirkei Avot to help build our character. Rabbi Dr. Nachum Amsel, in his dissertation that he wrote in 1988, he has several books you can buy on Amazon on Jewish values, and he has a lot of wonderful things to say. But in his original dissertation, he really frames the educational aspect of this, I think, very importantly. He says, a teacher repeating to the students 100 times, be honest, will not make them honest. Neither, unfortunately, will the learning of sources, even Torah sources, influence most students to change behavior. Teachers who have used these methods to try to inculcate values often have students who parrot the teacher, learn all the details of Jewish law, and even receive a high test grade. These methods and techniques, however, will not make them better Jews or more moral people. So just having the knowledge, just thinking about an idea, just learning about an idea, just reading about an idea isn't going to create that moral behavior or the transformation of character, the transformation of personality. So how can we go about and do this in a better way? So I want to provide first a framework. This is a framework for those who've been in my classes or in my shiurim in the past. I've probably mentioned this before because I think this is a foundational framework for how I try to view Torah sources in general and Pirkei Avot in particular. So we have the beginning of Pirkei Avot tells us that Shimon, the righteous, used to say that the world stands on three things. Al shosha dvar ha'olam omed, ala Torah, v'al avoda, v'gemilas chasadim. On Torah, which is either Torah learning or Torah living. Let's assume Torah learning for now, as many commentators do. Avoda, which is worship, which can either mean sacrifices or it can mean prayer, something of some sort of connecting, worshiping God. And gemilut chasadim is moral, ethical behavior, acts of kindness towards others. And there's two prisms that I would like us to reflect on this tripartite aspect of Shimon HaTzadik, where he says the whole world stands on this, the world being the global world as a macrocosm, as well as a person, an individual. Our world is built on these three things on a microcosmic level. So the first framework prism that I want to be looking through is the Nesiva Shalom, who frames this with what I would compare to the cognitive behavior therapy triangle. For those familiar with cognitive behavior therapy, the way that we try to change through a therapeutic process is by engaging in an analysis of the interplay between our thoughts, our emotions, and our behavior. So if I want to change an emotion, the way I change an emotion is either by changing a behavior or by changing the thoughts. So certain thoughts lead to certain emotions. If I think differently, if I think perhaps more rationally, then my feelings, my emotions will be more adaptive and be more healthy. If I have certain emotions, let's say I'm afraid of dogs, right? So this is one classic example. If I have a phobia, I'm afraid of dogs. So that emotion of fear, how do I overcome that? How do I engage in therapeutic process to change that emotion? So I would either change the thoughts about how I view dogs, or more likely, what I would do is actually change my behaviors around dogs. So when I'm afraid of dogs, I usually, if I have the fear, I will avoid the dog. And by avoiding the dog, I'm actually teaching myself, I'm rehearsing that fear and the thought that dogs are scary and something that needs to be avoided. But if I change my behavior, and this is what behavior therapy does, cognitive behavior for phobias do, is that we learn to approach the thing that we are afraid of, and by approaching it slowly, that behavior changes both our feelings about that object that we're afraid of, as well as the thoughts at the same time change as well. So that fear that I had, that dogs are scary, they're terrifying, it's going to kill me, and then all of a sudden I start approaching the dog, and the fear starts going less and less, and the thoughts about the dog now become changed as well. They're not as terrifying, they're not as scary. So the way we look at changing behavior, character, our personality is through this CBT framework. So the Nesiva Shalom says something about Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim that maps onto this very well. He says that Torah, and you have the source on the side. I'm not going to read through all of it in Hebrew, but if you want to take a screenshot, feel free to. He says that Torah represents things that relate to the intellect, to thinking, l'marat hasichlit. That's what Torah represents as a paradigm. Avoda represents emotions, the rigshe ha'adam, our feelings, right? The connection to God through prayer has an emotional aspect to it. And then gemilut chasadim, those actions represent actions, behaviors, things that we do for other people, right? So as a paradigm, Torah, Avodah, gemilut chasadim represents Torah as thinking, thoughts, avoda as regesh, emotions, and gemilut chasadim as pu'ulot, as behaviors. So our world stands on our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So if we're going to try thinking about how to change our world, meaning change our character, change our personality, it's not just enough to give me an idea. I need to think about it through a prism of how does this idea relate to my thinking, my emotions, and my behaviors. So that's prism one that I want us to be thinking about. Prism 2 is based on a different commentary who says something fascinating about the same ideas. He says, the Maharal says that we don't think about it in terms of the psychological makeup of a human being, the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. That's one perspective. But a different perspective is to think about it through different relational aspects, different relationships that we have in life. And this way, if I'm just thinking about character formation, I'm just thinking about myself. That's not enough, because we have more connections than just how we relate to ourselves or how we relate to other people. So the Maharal says that Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim represent three paradigmatic relationships that we have. Torah represents our relationship to ourselves, ben adam la'atzmo. Avodah, our worship, represents our ben adam la'makom, how we relate to God. And then Gemilut Chasadim represents ben adam lechavero, how we relate to other people, self, other, God, interpersonal, and transcendent. So between these two frameworks of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, I get my entire psychological makeup. I want to change my character. I need to think about my character from these three dynamics on a deeper level than just a surface. It's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, as well as on a deeper relational level from three perspectives: self, other, and God. Okay, so this is the framework that I want us to, it's a broad framework. It's not going to match everything we're doing, but I think whenever we're talking about character formation, and I do this in all my courses at Azrieli, where we're talking about values and we're talking about character education, this is always the first class that I'm giving, is to create this framework. So now any value that we're talking about, any character trait that we want to inculcate, we want to be thinking about it from these six perspectives, this double framework. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move towards mapping the best practices in character education, which tries to bridge this gap between the moral, knowledge and moral behavior. How do you bridge that gap? How do you create people who have better character, who are more moral people? And we're going to connect these best practices to some aspects of Pirkei Avot that I think when we just do our cursory surface read of Pirkei Avot, we tend to ignore. And if we're going to change our approach to Pirkei Avot, that we're going to use these best practices, these ideas, these fundamental concepts that I think are embedded in Pirkei Avot but get lost when we just read through it quickly, then we'll have a better chance at actually having the Torah transform our character, which is what it is supposed to do. So the five different insights that we're going to be looking at is first about attention, repetition, and memorization. We're going to look at then poetry and aesthetics. Taking action is insight 3. Insight 4 is identity formation, and insight 5 is classroom strategies. We're going to be mapping these insights from the character education literature to insights from Pirkei Avot and its commentaries. We're going to start with attention, repetition, and memorization. Some of this thinking that I've developed here is based on the book by Professor Jonathan Wynne Schofer called The Making of a Sage, where he studies Pirkei Avot and Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is a later compilation that relates and piggybacks off of some aspects of Pirkei Avot. It's a nice discussion as to exactly what the relationship is, which we'll bypass for now. But the book itself talks about how both Pirkei Avot and Avot de Rabbi Natan go and affect or try to change the character of its reader and the person who's engaged in the text. And some of his insights are pave the way towards what I'm trying to present, that it's not just about reading the text, but there's something else that needs to be happening for us to gain the character transformation from the text. So Professor Schofer writes, it's a direct quote, "Rabbinic wisdom sayings are short, compact units of discourse," and that's really what Pirkei Avot is about. It's a short, succinct aphorism with distinct stylistic features that convey ethical and theological teachings as art of instruction and guidance. Such maxims are the most fundamental way that Rabbi Natan, that's Avot Rabbi Natan, same would go for Pirkei Avot, hails or beckons its subjects, and has prescriptive utterances that point to ideals for which the reader or listener should strive. They constitute the most basic way that Rabbi Natan sets out processes of change, formation, and transformation from one's present state to a sagely one. So how do we go from our present state now to the sagely one? So that's how do we fill that gap of who we want to be to who from where we are now? It's these short maxims or epigrams. They often appear in the second person. It's the sages are speaking to you. It's a direct command to us. It's an imperative. The utterances are imperative. So the sages, through these brief, short snippets of ideas, are trying to motivate us to, to act. Now, that is an important stance to take when I'm reading the text, and maybe we already do this when we read Pirkei Avot. This is not a passive text. This is one that I need to be actively being spoken to. I need to imagine myself as being commanded or recommended or to try. The sages are trying to convince me to behave in a certain way. So I need to engage the text with that mindset of already trying to be influenced. This is something I can do. This is something I can change. This is something I can improve on. And the sages are talking to me directly. That's why it's in second person, it's to you. Building off of this, it's important to note that he points out, and this is obvious once you read Pirkei Avot, most or many of these statements are three ideas together, and he argues, and other commentaries, Maharal says this as well, is that the reason why three statements are usually clustered together, Torah, Avodah, Gemilut, Chasadim, as well as almost all other statements in the first parak, as well as others in future chapters, it was because the goal was for Pirkei Avot to be memorized. And that's really important because I think that's one of the things that we lack when we just read through it quickly and we don't try to memorize it. The text itself was created as Torah Sheba'al Peh, as oral Torah that is supposed to be memorized. And more importantly, if we want to affect change, we need to have the ideas resonant and being able to be retrieved from our memory. That to be on the top of our mind when the ethical or moral or character challenge is in front of us. We need to be able to recall it quickly. And if it's something I read once and I don't remember, it's not going to be on my mind. If it's an idea that maybe I once heard and like, oh, maybe it's relevant, it's not going to be on my mind. It's not going to affect change. So partially, I think this is an important thing for us to be thinking about as we're reading Pirkei Avot. Maybe we don't have the greatest memories in the world, and maybe we can't memorize the whole Pirkei Avot, but if there is some idea that resonates with us strongly, it is worth the time because this is how it was originally composed in order to be memorized. So again, we're trying to think, I'm reading Pirkei Avot, but my character is not being changed. Well, again, we're not necessarily using the text as it was originally meant. It was originally meant to be memorized. And once memorized, now the thinking, the thoughts, the aphorisms, these short statements that are meant to be memorized are going to be on the tip of my tongue. They're going to be there. They're going to be ready to come out so they can change and affect behavior. So step number one is knowing why Pirkei Avot, how it was written, the form, the goal was for it to be memorized, and for us to try as much as possible to take whatever statements resonate with us and then try to memorize them. The second piece of this that Schofer focuses on is this idea of histakel. It comes up in a few Mishnayot that we're supposed to look. And looking is not just looking briefly or on a surface level. Looking requires observing, reflecting, attention, and meditation. So that when we're thinking about the text is commanding us to be mistakel. So already in the text, right, it's not just about reading. The text is telling us to meditate, to be reflective, to observe, to be self-reflective, to apply to ourselves. And if we don't take that extra step to really hone in on the idea, not just read it quickly, but A, memorize it, and B, meditate on it, reflect on it, inculcate it, become part of ourselves, then we're going to be lacking in the capacity for this idea to generate character change. And one example of this is histakel b'shlosha dvarim v'yata b'alidei avera. This comes up in the first Mishnah of the second chapter, as well as the first Mishnah in the third chapter. Rabbi Dr. and Akavi ben Mahalalel say similar things, that we need to histakel, observe, reflect, be attentive, meditate on three things, and then you will not come to sin. I just read this, but I'm still sinning. Well, it's because we are not being mistakel. We need to really be attentive and meditate and reflect, self-reflective on how these things impact us. And that leads to the final point from Professor Schofer, which is that this leads to some level of internalized speech and a dialogue with the self, in the sense that these ideas are supposed to become part of our psyche, that we are struggling with them, we're thinking about them, we're dialoguing with them, we're talking about them. And this way, when that character challenge comes up, we'll be able to operationalize this short, pithy aphorism, which is a nice song. I remember, now I remember it, now I memorized it, and now I can really bring it, and I thought about it, I've reflected on it, and now I can really bring it into the fore in order to affect change. So point number one is, if we want to do Pirkei Avos right, and you don't have to take on the whole thing at once, but it's slowly focusing, meditating, repeating, memorizing a specific statement that speaks to you, and then once you have that, we'll be able to bring that to our character development even better. One brief idea that brings us one step further is a beautiful thought from Professor Aaron Kohler, who has this article, Self-Referential Coda to Avot and the Egyptian Israelite Literary Tradition of Wisdom. It's a long, nice article. I recommend that you read the whole thing. The basic point is that at the end of Pirkei Avot, we have this statement of Ben Bagbag, where he says, and this is also a nice song, right? Ben Bagbag Omer. So you have the Shweki song for you if you want to more easily remember it. But for our purposes now, what does it mean, Hafoch ba v'afoch ba de kula ba? What is the ba, right? What is the it that this statement is referring to? So most commentaries understand the it as being Torah. Review Torah, turn it over again, and keep learning Torah. What Professor Kohler argues is that the ba is actually Pirkei Avot. This is the end of Pirkei Avot. It's the second to last Mishnah. And what the second to last Mishnah is doing is it's a self-referential coda, which he tracks in these other wisdom literature traditions, that the text itself refers to itself and tells you to study itself. So basically, Pirkei Avot at the end is telling you to review Pirkei Avot over and over and over again, because everything you need about character, about your theology, about your outlook, about your philosophy is all within Pirkei Avot. So the small shift in this insight is that it's not about Torah per se, it's about specifically Pirkei Avot, and this highlights again that if we want to do Pirkei Avot and have it inform and transform our character, we need to continually review it, repeat it, memorize, internalize, etc. It's not something that we just do once a week for a few minutes while we quickly review it during between Mincha and Ma'ariv on Shabbos afternoon. And as I mentioned to you in the beginning, I would come back to this. The truth is, the original minhag, the original tradition, was to learn Pirkei Avot the whole year on Shabbat afternoon. It wasn't just between Pesach and Shavuot, which is a nice minhag, that's a nice tradition, but it was really for the whole year, because this is a text that we need to continually review over and over and over again. Hafoch ba v'afoch ba de kula ba. So through reviewing, through internalizing, through memorizing, that's the first step in utilizing Pirkei Avot as it was supposed to be used, to transform character, and not perhaps how we use it now, hoping it'll transform character, or paying like, okay, I'll read it quickly, and then that's going to be, now I'm ready for Shavuos. That's not exactly how it works. You need to put a little bit more effort into it. The second insight that I think we can borrow from the character education literature and some of the Jewish studies analysis of Pirkei Avot is something that Professor Amram Tropper writes in his book, Wisdom, Politics, and Historiography. So he analyzes Pirkei Avot in light of the Greco-Roman Near East and the philosophical trends that were going on in the times when the Mishnah was being codified by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And it's a fascinating book, highly recommended. One of the things that he focused on is a whole chapter on the importance of the rhythm, the parallelism, the chiasms, the metaphor, the poetic aspects of Pirkei Avot, which when we read it too quickly, we miss out on and we lose. And part of the importance of the rhythm and the parallelisms and the chiasms and the metaphors that are being used is that Pirkei Avot is doing something. The way that the sages are teaching us the character education is not through a classic philosophical lens, which would have been, if you read Aristotle's, Nicomachean Ethics, it's treatises, it's lessons, it's full essays on how to transform character. That's not how Pirkei Avot works. Pirkei Avot works with short, brief, artistically crafted statements that relate to and have a tradition that go back to Proverbs, Mishlei, that has the same stylistic elements to it, and it's done purposefully. When Professor Tropper argues is that, and these are two direct quotes, ancient wisdom method of instilling virtues and practical wisdom is through repetition and memorization. So that enhances and reinforces what we said in the last slide, but he takes it a step further. And he says the aesthetic dimension of artistic speech stirs the imagination and indicates ideas deep within our minds. Wisdom literature is supposed to mold character by conjuring and evoking images rather than by transmitting the details of a value system in clear prose. So we're not giving you prose, we're not giving you even narratives in this. The wisdom literature molds character, right? That's the strategy. It molds character through the artistic speech, through the way that it sounds, through the rhythms, through the parallelisms, through the chiasms, through the metaphors. That helps shape and mold character. So this one's a little bit abstract, but I'm going to give you one example of how this might play out when we're more attentive to the language and the sound and the feel of how it comes out of our mouths can affect the way that we internalize the idea. So the Mishnah in the second chapter, end of second chapter, has a statement per Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says, "Hayom katzar v'malacha meruba v'poalim atzelim v'asachar harbe v'al habayis dochek." The day is short, the work is plentiful, the laborers are indolent, the reward is great, and the master of the house is insistent. So if we just slow down, first of all, there's a side point is that there's fascinating comparisons between this and there's a similar statement by Hippocrates and how you compare and contrast it. Yara Furstenberg has an article that analyzes the differences between how these are used in these two philosophical streams. That's a side point for now. Fascinating stuff, though. So I highly recommend you search that if you're interested in the philosophical underpinnings of comparative between the Mishnah and Greco-Roman philosophy. But for our purposes now, what Professor Tropper talks about is that if you look at this statement, so number one, there's a two-beat rhythm. So if we focus on it, hayom katzar, v'malacha meruba, v'poalim atzilim, v'asachar harbe, v'al habayis dochek, right? So there's a repetition, the rhythm not only helps you memorize, but there's something that helps you keep track, and it's like it comes like grinding down and pounding into your soul, into your psyche through the rhythmic beat. The other thing he focuses on is that there's an antithetic parallelism, which is that there's a distinction, between two sides going opposite directions, right? So it's hayom katzar v'malacha meruba. So that's the first half is opposite to the second half, and then v'poalim atzelim v'aschar harbe. That's again, there's a parallel here that's not synonymous, but it's going against the first half. So first half, A is not like B, C is not like D. Again, if you pay attention to it, it helps you not only memorize but internalize. And then the last thing that he points out is the chiasmic element of this Mishnah, which again, if you read it quickly, you'll never see it unless you slow down and analyze the text, analyze the rhythm, analyze the form. So it's A B C B A. Hayom katzar v'malacha meruba, v'poalim atzelim is the middle, and Vaschar Harbe Ba'bayis Dochek. We'll explain this using his own words. So he quotes a scholar named Melamed. Melamed has pointed out that this Mishnah is a chiasm of the form ABCBA. The A component relates to the pressure of limited time. This pressure is implied by the short day of the first line and expressed by the master of the house urging in the final line. Okay, so Hayom Katzar, this A on the top, Bayit Dochek on the bottom is pressure. That's for you should feel the pressure in the A's. In the B component involves the repetition of the root rav, meaning great. In the second leg, there's a great amount of work, while the fourth leg refers to a magnitude of the wages. Okay, so miruba rav and schar harbe rav. Again, if you're not paying attention, you don't realize it's really the same, the same shoresh, the same root in both of those. So it's the work is great and the reward is great. And that's how the two B's line up. So you have A is the pressure, B is the amount, is a lot. And then finally, which highlights usually in the chiasm, that middle piece is the crux, is the fulcrum that brings everything together. So surrounded by surrounded by work, wages, and a pressuring employer, the workers sit lazily in the center of the saying, right? So it's highlighting that people are lazy, right? It's really accentuating the fact that despite the fact that the two A's are referencing the pressure and the two B's are representing the magnitude of how much is supposed to be done, the poalim are still atzelim. They're still lazy. Again, just this short analysis of the text, of the form, of the rhythm, of the parallelism can perhaps slow us down and be able to highlight the essential aspects of what the Mishnah is going to be doing. And this is something that we're going to be totally missing if we read through it quickly. And just to emphasize again, what Tropper's argument is this is the essence of wisdom literature in the way it transforms character, or one of the ways that it's trying to transform character is through this poetic and the aesthetic. It's through the sound, it's through the rhythm that itself enhances the character development. So that's insight 2. Insight 3, and I would say this is probably the most practical and important to take away, is that in order to change character, you need to take action. Character cannot be changed by reading or just thinking. Character needs to be transformed through doing. And there's several Mishnayot that bring this out. The first one is that Shimon beno Omer kol yamai gadalti ben chachamim. All my days I used to grow up amongst the sages. V'lo matzati leguf tov el shtika. The best thing for the body is silence. Interesting. We could talk about that at a different time, but we're going to focus on today is lo hamedrash ikar ela hamasa. Study is not the most important thing, but actions, right? If we want, and you can understand this on several levels, but I think that the most important for us right now is that when it comes to changing, when it comes to becoming a better person and building our character, it's not the medrash that's ikar, it's not the talking, it's not even the learning about it. That's important. Doesn't say it's not important. It's important, but it's not the ikar. It's not the essence. The essence of the change is the ma'aseh, is the action. And Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky, in his commentary on Pirkei Avot here, contrasts early forms of therapy that he refers to as talk therapy, which was a therapeutic model where you basically talk things out and eventually get some insight, and maybe that'll help you change. So he's critical of that and compares it to more modern therapy, like cognitive behavior therapy, that doesn't just focus on talking and ideas, but focuses on action, right? And the quote here is, the traditional approach, that's the talk therapy approach, was based on the theory that insight will change behavior. The contemporary approach, which is much more effective, is to change the pathological behavior first. First, you change the behavior, and through the changing of the behavior, the character then changes. So this is an essential piece to character education. When we just talk about things, when we just give drashot about it in shul, when we just give a musar shmuz in the base medrash, anytime we're just talking about ideas, that has very limited impact on actual character change. And until somebody actually makes a behavioral change, it is through that behavioral change, going back to our CBT triangle, is that through the behavior, the thoughts and the emotions change and transform. Without Without the behavior, you get stuck in nothing. It's very hard to change character without changing behavior. We have another Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that brings this out as well. We'll save that for a different time. And let's move on to insight number 4, which in that book that I presented in the beginning, The Character Gap by Christian Miller. There's a picture of it in the beginning. He gives recommendations for how to bridge this character gap. And one of the recommendations he gives has to do with identity formation. There's another scholar named Christian Christensen who analyzes this in detail as well and talks about the importance of moral identity in creating character. The basic idea is if I view myself as somebody who's a moral person, then I will likely engage in those moral behaviors. If I see myself as having a character trait, then I will more likely, if that's part of my identity, then I'll more likely engage in that character behavior. So I think something that Pirkei Avos is trying to do is it's trying to inculcate within us an identity of somebody who has the character traits, who should be a moral person, who wants to do good and aspires and strives to do good, and it builds this moral identity. There's some nuance here because somebody could have an identity of being good, but they're actually bad, so they're tricking themselves. That's problematic. But for the most part, in most healthy cases, having an ideal that I am generally a good person. Sometimes good people do bad things too, so it's not black and white, but that I'm generally a good moral person and I strive and aspire to be a good moral person, then that's itself, that identity helps transform the character. So the Mishnayot are trying to bring out that identity within us. And I'll just bring for you 2 brief examples. One on the negative side, which is Rabbi Shimon says, Al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmecha. Don't be wicked in your own eyes, in your own esteem. And the Meiri, a medieval commentary, says what I think is in very logical way of reading this, is that when I am evil in my own eyes, that itself then creates my identity of being evil, which then leads to more evil actions. So when I do something bad, and this is an important therapeutic concept as well, is to label behaviors, not personality. So if I do something bad, I shouldn't say I'm a bad person. I should say I did something bad. We want to acknowledge it. We don't want to pretend that we did something good if we did something bad, or we don't want to ignore the fact that we did something bad, but we label the behavior as being bad and not me as a bad person. Once I label myself with an identity of Rasha, then that will perpetuate and create a self-fulfilling prophecy of continuing to do Rasha, wicked types of things. But if I look at myself and aspire to be somebody who is more of a righteous person, then that ideally will generate and perpetuate righteous behaviors. One fascinating manifestation of this is in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the 2nd chapter tells us, the Mishnah tells us that he used to count the praises of his students. Hu haya monesh shivchan. What is that? What did he? So he said for each student, Rabbi Elazar ben Horkanos, he is this type of person. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, he is this type of person. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen is a pious person. Rabbi Shimon Netanel is a fears sin. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is this type of person. Where he has a good intellect, he has a good memory, he has good character, he has good. He used to identify for each student he had what their strength was. And Rabbi Sacks beautifully explains that. The following quote: "Why does the Mishnah, whose aim is to teach us lasting truths, gives us this apparently trivial account of Yochanan ben Zakkai's pupils and how he used to praise them? The answer, I believe, is that this Mishnah is telling us how to raise disciples, how to be a coach, mentor, and guide by using focused praise. This Mishnah does not simply say that Yochanan ben Zakkai said good things about his students. It uses an unusual locution. He used to count, moneh, their praise, meaning his positive remarks were precise and accurately targeted. He told each of his disciples what their specific strength was, and that helped them create that identity, that character strength for themselves, which then helped build that strength even further. So creating an identity of somebody who aspires to be good, who aspires to specific character strengths, is something that Pirkei Avot is trying to do for us. And I hearken back that Pirkei Avot is huge. It's 5 chapters of Mishnah, 1 of a Bright at the end, 6 chapters altogether. There's so many lessons to be taken away. It might be overwhelming, but I would say to hone in, to pick what strength, what idea speaks to me, What am I already good at? How can I internalize the identity of being that type of person? Memorize that Mishnah, analyze that Mishnah. What's the rhythm of that Mishnah? Let that Mishnah be on the forefront of my head, and then it will help me operate in towards character growth. Right? So it's blending some of these ideas together will help us towards that the goal of bridging that gap between character, where we are and where we want to be. Finally, the last strategy I would call classroom strategies. And we're going to go back to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his 5 students. So we're piggybacking off of that last statement. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, after he lists his 5 students and names them, he says to them, Se'u or u, ezu hi derech yeshara sheyidbach ba ha'adam. He says, go forth and observe which is the right way to which a man should cleave. And each student gives a different answer. Rabbi Elazar says a good eye. Rabbi Shua said a good companion. Rabbi Yossi says a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said foresight. Rabbi Elazar says a good heart. Rabbi Yochanan said to them, I prefer the words of Elazar ben Arach, for in his words, your words are included. But I want to take a step back and analyze this Mishnah because it's mind-blowing and fascinating. Some scholars call this a philosophical study that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was doing in his classroom. There's a lot of interesting material comparing this to classrooms in philosophical schools of the time. I could reference the articles I mentioned before. Some of them talk about that. But if you just focus on this first sentence here, if I was a classic sort of stereotypical teacher of character in a Jewish school, I was a Rebbe. I was giving a Musar Shmuz. I wanted my students to become, to know what the right way to live was. So I would presumably do one of 2 things, which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai doesn't do. One is I would perhaps tell them the answer, right? This is the way you're supposed to behave. Right? So that's one thing that he doesn't do. And the other thing he doesn't do is he doesn't say, go look in, or here is what the pasuk, the verse, the Torah, the mitzvah is to do. He says to them, Se'u or u, go out and see, go out and observe. And different commentaries take this in slightly different places, but all come to similar conclusions, which is they're going out of somewhere and then they're observing something. So the thing they're going out of, some commentaries write, is the Beit Midrash. They're sitting and they're learning, and he tells them, leave the Beit Midrash and go observe outside in the real world, do a study as to what you think, observing people, what's the best trait for them to have? What's the straight path that they should follow, they should cling to? So he's giving them an assignment to go out to the real world and explore. Others explain Se'ur U means to go out of themselves, go out of their own mindset, to try to understand others, to do perspective taking. Don't think about this answer just from your perspective, but how would it apply to others as well? Either way, what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is doing, in my estimation here, is following some of the best practices in character development in schools, how to teach character in a classroom. And to here, I quote to you something from the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtues out in England. Great resource if you want to teach character education or learn more about it. Tons of material there. But just one little excerpt from a paper they wrote, which I think you can read what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was doing and almost all these bullet points that they suggest for teaching character education in and out of the classroom. Number 1, discussion-based learning engages pupils with moral and ethical issues through teacher-guided and pupil-led interactions. So the discussion, he's creating a dialogue between them and the teacher, and him as a teacher, and them and the students are discussing, are analyzing, are comparing, contrasting. Number 2, independent learning encourages pupils to think critically and take responsibility for their own character development. He sends them out. They should go learn this on their own. Reflective learning guides pupils to consider their character through critical reflection. Cooperative learning involves pupils working together, encouraging teamwork and communication. Inquiry-based learning encourages curiosity, challenging pupils to ask and answer open-ended questions. Experiential learning offers pupils opportunities to be active learners through a range of virtue-forming experiences. So I think Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai here is doing a combination of all of these things. You want to teach character, you want to know how to behave, you need to discuss it, you need to debate it, you need to observe it, you need to have a teacher-student relationship where you can have honest and important conversations about growth and about development and about how to think about what the good life is and what the good character is. It's not just, here's what you need to do. It's not just top down telling them what to do. It's inquiry based, it's student centered, and that allows them to come up with novel ideas that they weigh, they discuss, they debate, and he lands on one of them as being more important because it includes the others. So there's actually some critical thinking skills involved in this as well. But at the end of the day, what we have from Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, I think, is something we can model when we're talking about our own character, is that we don't just, when we just stick to the text, right? Getting back to our we read Pirkei Avot, why does it not change our character? Well, part of it is that we don't think about it in a way that's critical to the real world, that's critical to ourselves, that puts our own, that discusses it, critically and independently and collectively together. We're just reading a text. So I think that if we want to either help our students if we're teachers, or help ourselves grow, help our peers, our whoever's trying to grow here, we need to be thinking about the text from these multiple possible learning techniques, so that we're not just stuck in the same read, repeat, read, repeat, read, repeat. There's some innovative, student-centered, critical ways of engaging in the character development through these lenses. Lots of other things we could cover in the future, which we're not going to talk about now, but just to point towards it, something that Pirkei Avot does not have is stories, but Avot de Rabbi Natan, that parallel text that I told you about before, does have stories. So if you want to analyze the role of stories in moral development, the place of role models and moral exemplars in moral development, and sometimes the stories we have are complex and they don't give you black and white answers, and analyzing and talking about ethical nuances through the stories is a future discussion for character education, character development. The use of metaphors is something that comes up in the character education literature that Pirkei Avot has a lot of. Parables, which there are some in Pirkei Avot, but more in Midrash, there are parables, and how parables help character education. And then I would be remiss without talking, and we mentioned it briefly, but an essential aspect of character education is self-reflection and the ability to apply it to yourself. And without that, there's always going to be a gap. So the ideas aren't going to be enough without applying it to the self. So those are all other things that we're going to, hopefully future shirim and future writings be able to develop in a little bit more depth. So just to recap, what we did this evening is we're trying to fill the character gap with Pirkei Avot, but Pirkei Avot just on its own as a text that we read will not be able to fill the character gap. We need to think about it in a much more nuanced and detailed way, which part of our argument was that this is how Pirkei Avot was originally intended to be used, but it's not being used correctly when we just read through it quickly. We want to think about Pirkei Avot through the lens of Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors as one lens, relational lens of self and other and God through the other lens. And that gives us a depth to be able to think through all of the character traits and the values that we're trying to inculcate through these different prisms. And then the 5 insights we saw is that number 1 is that Pirkei Avot is supposed to be attentive to it, to pay attention, to meditate, to think critically about it, to repeat, and to even try to memorize. So this way the ideas are easily are easily retrieved in our mind in a way that is relevant to the settings where we need to exercise our character. Insight number 2 was focusing on the poetic and the aesthetic aspects of the Mishnayot, which themselves are supposed to have, based on the ancient wisdom literature tradition, that aspect itself helps inculcate and grind in the character aspects of the sayings themselves. So if we just read it quickly, or we're just reading it perhaps in English without focusing on those nuances, spending time focusing on the text, on the form, on the sound, on the rhythm, will help us in inculcating the character. As I pointed out, probably the most important is taking action. Just reflecting and thinking and reading is not enough. We need to practice if we want to change our character. Number 4 was that part of Pirkei Avot is trying to change our identity to be people who aspire to be sages, people who aspire to be moral and developed and live a life infused with Torah and Yirat Shamayim, and part of that is developing the identity. The Mishnah would help us develop that identity, so then that identity helps us then perpetuate that character moving forward. And then finally, the classroom strategies helps us think about these Mishnayot in ways that aren't just message, idea, content, but creative ways that bring us in to the analysis and the discussion of how to build character, how to live a good, ethical, moral, spiritual life is not just about reading a text, but it's about engaging in the text critically and using some of the best classroom strategies for that is really important for us if we want to bridge that character gap. For further resources, and I'm happy to hold and answer any questions anybody might have, but I just want to point out, if you're interested, on my website, psychfortorah.com, I have essays on Pirkei Avot starting from the first Mishnah all the way to the end of the 5th chapter. God willing, I have 2 Mishnayot left to write on the 5th chapter, and then God willing, this will turn into a book at some point. But if you're interested in these character virtue lenses through to develop Pirkei Avot, blending the Torah, the psychology, the education, the Jewish studies insights. So those articles are accessible on my website, and I'm happy if this is something of interest to somebody in the audience. This is something that they want to work on with me as I continue to develop these ideas, and God willing, part of my goal is to create character education curricula for not just for schools, for adult education, to help us bridge this gap, to help us build character, to use Torah, blending it with the best practices in educational psychology and character education and social emotional learning and positive psychology, and therefore being able to use the best tools for our own character growth. So if you want to speak to me, partner with me, talk about this more, I'm more than happy to speak about it. You can reach out to me through the website or through my YU email, which is mordechai.schiffman@yu.edu. Hope this was enlightening. But again, this is the beginning. Now you heard it. Now if you want to change, we got to put it into action. There's something of a strategy needs to shift, not just reading, but really engaging it critically so that we can internalize it. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has any thoughts.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Schiffman, for such an illuminating and inspiring presentation tonight. Please join us for the second part of our online series next Wednesday at 8 p.m. with Dr. Erica Brown as she explores Megillat Ruth through art and text. And the following Wednesday, May 28th, we'll hear our third part of the series from Rabbi Dr. Schiffman on why wasn't the Torah given in Israel, the exploration of Messianism, Zionism, and secular Judaism. Thank you all for joining tonight. And if anyone has any questions, we can stay on for a couple more minutes for Rabbi Schiffman to respond.